Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend. I know we did. My husband and I took our dogs to the beach and it was the puppy's first time actually seeing the ocean. And oh my god, he absolutely loved it. We've got two German Shepherds and the puppy's long to medium haired sable. So when he got wet, his fur was standing up like some kind of punk rock jackal. I've got some really cute photos that I'll put up on my socials, which if you'd like to follow, a link in the description below. The case we'll be covering today is one that I've wanted to cover for a long time. I actually had planned for it to be the first story for this channel, but ultimately I decided to cover Alana Callahan's story instead. Although the video itself was my first effort at editing and certainly reflects that, Alana's story is well worth listening to, and you can find it and other cases in my playlist. Today we're talking about Gerard Baden Clay, diving into her life and also her tragic death. It's a story that deserves to be heard, and one that's very personal to me, not only because it's a local story, one that I followed very closely at the time, but because it serves to educate and bring awareness to the issue of domestic violence and the never-ending cycle that so many of us experience. Domestic violence, or DV, involves the physical, sexual, financial, or emotional abuse of one person by another to intimidate, humiliate, or frighten, thereby maintaining power and control. As a society, we've come so far in recognising and reporting instances of domestic violence, and today we have thousands more resources than our counterparts did in the 1950s, for example. On the other hand, it's also a well-known fact that many cases of DV and abuse go unreported. The same behind closed doors rings true for so many survivors of DV. We know only too well how easy it is to portray that everything is fine in public, when the reality is anything but. DV isn't always physical. It can also be emotional, causing a slow erosion of everything you hold sacred. It can be the threat of losing your children that keeps you in that relationship, or the belief that they're sorry and it won't happen again. Don't get me wrong, DV isn't restricted to men abusing women either. It can happen to absolutely anyone. I've lived my own version of hell when it comes to DV, and for this reason, Alison's story holds a really special place in my heart. So go ahead, grab a coffee, and get comfy as we cover the story of Gerard Baden Clay. My name's Alyssa J. Welcome to Red Flags. Alison Jean Dickey was born on July the 1st, 1968, to her parents Priscilla and Jeff. She was the middle child with an older sister and a younger brother. The Dickey family grew up in Redbank, which is the suburb of Ipswich in Queensland, Australia. Now, Redbank itself is a pretty small suburb with approximately 1,865 residents. Alison always wanted to be famous, and at the age of 11, she seemed to be on track to making her dreams a reality, dancing with the Australian Youth Ballet Company, even travelling overseas in order to perform. By the age of 15, however, Alison gave up on her dreams of professional ballet dancing, choosing to focus on her education instead. At the age of 17, after finishing high school, Alison would go on to spend a year in Denmark as part of an exchange program. She would travel extensively throughout Europe, along with her best friend Linda, an experience that many Australians only dream of, taking in the sights and meeting people from different cultures. Linda was always the decision maker, with laid-back Alison always happy to follow. Following her exchange year, Alison returned to Australia, where she would study Japanese at the university, before spending a year, following graduation, in Japan itself, teaching English. Alison had an ear for languages and spoke several fluently, with French, Danish and Japanese, just to name a few. Her passion for travel grew, and in 1990, at the age of 22, Alison accepted an offer to work on Heron Island. Located on the Great Barrier Reef in far north Queensland, and well renowned for the turtles that come ashore each year in order to lay their eggs, Heron Island is a tropical paradise with a steady tourism trade. Alison's plan was to work for a few months during the tourist season and save some money while enjoying the gorgeous beaches and laid-back lifestyle. Her plans changed, however, and she decided to extend her stay after meeting and falling in love with Ian Drayton, a former military airman who now taught scuba diving at the island. It was a fast and passionate relationship, with the couple buying a house together and becoming engaged by July 1991. Back on the mainland, Alison began working for Flight Centre, while Ian embarked on a career in real estate. Life was happy and complete. Alison was quickly moving up through the ranks at Flight Centre, and the couple purchased a second property before renting this one out. In 1993, Alison decided to enter the Miss Australia Awards, a beauty pageant where the contestants would fundraise for the Australian Cerebral Palsy Foundation. Alison saw the pageant as a bit of fun, a way to get back on the stage again after her ballet days, and an opportunity to raise money for a good cause. With her stunning looks and bright green eyes, Alison would win the title of Miss Brisbane, before eventually missing out on the national title. She wasn't worried though. Her natural networking ability had meant that she'd raised well over $100,000 for the foundation. About this time, however, the relationship between Alison and Ian started to deteriorate. They were just on different paths, and eventually the engagement was called off. There was nothing acrimonious about the breakup, however. They each took one of the properties and moved on with their lives. Alison was continuing to perform well at her job with Flight Centre, first becoming the office manager of the Ipswich office, before being promoted to the State Human Resources Manager. For this new role, she was required to travel to the Brisbane office, approximately 45-minute drive from her home in Belbed Park. It was there that she would meet her future husband, Gerard Baden Clay. Gerard was born on September the 9th, 1970, to his parents Nigel and Elaine Baden Clay. Nigel was a civil servant for the Rhodesian government and the grandson of Lord Robert Baden-Powell, who's widely known for the founding the Scout movement. Now, Nigel and his family were extremely proud of this history, even changing their surname from Clay to Baden Clay in order to capitalise upon the name. I say that they capitalised because after doing all my research, it appears that Gerard's family, or at least his parents and his sister, had a really inflated opinion of the benefits that the Baden-Powell name would bring.
Scouting is a global organisation which has its core fundamental in doing unto others as you'd have done unto you and leaving the world a better place than you found it.
Gerard's claim to fame was as a great-grandson of Lord Baden-Powell, the founder of the Scouting movement.
Thank you.
And as this promotional video from a few years ago shows, he clearly enjoyed the prestige that attracted.
In fact, that's one of my favourite Scout laws, is the Scout is courageous, to have courage in the face of adversity.
Baden Clays were incredibly proud of the name and showed absolutely no hesitation in appropriating it in order to serve their needs best. After moving to Australia in 1980, Nigel and Elaine instilled into their children a belief that Baden Clays was superior. After completing high school, Gerard briefly attended university, but found himself unsuited to scholastic life. And with only a partial business degree under his belt, Gerard would take on a graduate position at an accounting firm, working alongside 20 to 30 other accountants in their auditing division. Each graduate was offered further education to progress their careers into becoming a chartered private accountant, or a CPA. However, Gerard was the only member of his team to decline this education, despite severely limiting his career progression in doing so. It really seems like the Baden Clay name wasn't really helping him too much in the real world. He would change career again, becoming a travel agent at the newly created Flight Centre in 1994, before moving to the Brisbane office as the head of their new 24-hour contact centre. Things were finally starting to look better for Gerard, and he had his eye on the gorgeous brunette with the green eyes that had just started working in his office. Gerard and Alison began dating in 1995, and a year later, Gerard would propose to Alison in the middle of a cafe along Park Road in Milton under the neon lights of an imitation Eiffel Tower. Gerard would later say that he had chosen that particular restaurant as Alison and himself had plans to travel to France later that year, and he, quote, didn't want Alison dawdling around on every street corner waiting for him to propose. In fact, Alison hadn't even been thinking about marriage because while he was still awkwardly down on one knee, she asked him if she could have a week to think about it. A little taken aback and surprised that she wasn't falling all over herself to join the esteemed Baden Clay family, Gerard agreed to wait. She eventually accepted, which was a decision that she would later regret. Gerard Baden Clay had an uncommonly close relationship with his parents, Nigel and Elaine. Actually, you know what? That's giving him way too much credit. I'm not a journalist bound by a code of ethics here, and I don't have to remain impartial and give a fair and unbiased account of everybody. I'm just an everyday human, giving my own opinion of a convicted murderer. Gerard Baden Clay was every single derogatory stereotype that you can think of. Not only was he superficial and lazy when it came to furthering himself or utilising the advantages that were quite literally thrown at him his entire life, he was a pompous, self-absorbed mummy's boy, overly concerned with outward appearances, and who was totally incapable of making important life decisions, such as the date of his wedding, by himself or even with his fiancée. Oh, no. Gerard had to ask Mummy and Daddy what date they thought he should be married. In all honesty, he just comes across as a total douche. And the thing that gets to me the most, his comments to his friends and his co-workers regarding proposing to Alison, he was essentially conveying that the only reason he proposed was to avoid Alison begging. He just comes across to me as so totally self-centered and more concerned about the way he was perceived than anything. But it even gets worse. After asking when he should get married, Nigel looked at the calendar and saw that his own wedding anniversary would fall on a Saturday this year. Oh, how convenient. And so it came to be that Alison and Gerard will become husband and wife on the 23rd of August 1997, Nigel on Elaine's 28th wedding anniversary. The couple settled into married life, spending the first few years overseas, working in the UK and in Switzerland. However, they would return to Brisbane in late 1999. Alison resumed work at Flight Centre, continuing to work in the global HR department in a part-time capacity. Gerard, however, struggled initially to find suitable work until he was offered a 12-month contract with Flight Centre's experimental foray into online travel bookings, which was named Global Online. Unfortunately, as with many startups at the time, Global Online would fold after only 6 months, leaving Gerard without work unexpectedly. Not surprisingly, Gerard was angry and even tried to take Flight Centre to court, stating that, quote, he had left stable work in the UK and Switzerland with the promise of a lucrative contract, end quote, and citing unfair dismissal. The case was dismissed, and Gerard was faced with having to find work again. It was made even worse that by now, in December 2000, 3 years following their wedding, Alison was pregnant with their first child. Now, when I was doing my research for this case, I read so many conflicting reports describing the marriage between Gerard and Alison, and they just raised red flags for me. Alison was always described by those who loved her as a follower, very laid back and happy to let others lead. A big part of why she was attracted to Gerard was the fact that he took control. He was the one that would make all the decisions, after careful consideration with his parents, of course. And initially, Alison was happy to go with the flow. Despite her own successes, Alison struggled with anxiety and felt that Gerard taking point was a good thing. After their eldest daughter was born in July 2001, however, his behaviour became more and more controlling. By now, Gerard was working from home, dabbling in the stock market. Visitors to the house were surprised to see a baby monitor in the living room with a cord leading all the way into the garage where Gerard had his home office. Alison's mother Priscilla had come to help her daughter soon after the birth, and when she went to talk to her daughter, she was surprised to see Alison raise a finger to her lips while looking directly at the baby monitor on the table. The excuse that Gerard gave was that he would be able to hear Alison asking for help anywhere in the house, but this left Priscilla feeling worried and increasingly concerned. September 11th changed everything for the couple. Gerard's home business collapsed, along with the travel industry. In a panic, Gerard sold their shares in Flight Centre, ultimately losing the family's safety net. I guess that accounting experience didn't come in handy. Even though he had a newborn, a wife who was struggling with anxiety and postnatal depression, and no job, Gerard joined his younger brother on a European vacation at the end of 2001, leaving Alison to rely on her parents for financial and emotional support. Fast forward to 2002, Gerard discovered that the previously stagnant real estate industry was suddenly experiencing a boom, and he jumped on the bandwagon, possibly making the only good business decision so far. To give you a bit of an idea, during 1990, the average house price in Brisbane was 118,000 AUD. Over the next decade, it would slowly increase by about 46% to 173,000 at the turn of the century. Over the next 7 years, however, from 2000 to 2007, The average house price would jump by 160% to $450,000. It was a booming business, and all Gerard had to do was get a real estate license in order to jump on the bandwagon. Rain & Horne Kenmore had recently opened their new office and were hiring. In walked Gerard Baden Clay, a recently licensed agent with no prior experience, but he was well dressed and full of confidence. He had a background in sales from his time with Flight Centre, and he just checked all the boxes. It was his confidence that landed Gerard the role. After all, real estate is a confidence game. Gerard even told the owners that he was a package deal. If they wanted to employ him, they also had to employ his parents. Now, Ray Leach and Jason Arnott, the owners of Rain & Horne, had years of experience in the real estate industry between them. But they'd never heard of a baby agent negotiating a contract for their parents as part of the deal. They accept the unconventional proposal, however, with one condition of their own. Gerard would be paid a retainer, and Rain & Horne would not pay Mr. and Mrs. Baden Clay, leaving Gerard to subcontract them himself. It was 3 for the price of 1, and Gerard accepted. He had his foot in the door, and his parents were there to help tie his laces. The day that the Baden Clays arrived, though, it was apparent to everyone in the office that they were an exceptionally tight family. Gerard, Nigel and Elaine were affectionate, giving warm hugs and kisses, both in the office and in public, often. Gerard would refer to his parents as Mummy and Daddy in front of clients, and the owners noted that he would often consult his parents before making decisions. It was just a lot to get used to. So a big part of real estate is doing the groundwork, getting the clients in, cold calling, all of that. Nigel and Elaine would actually do all that groundwork, and they would bring in the potential clients, and Gerard would step in to close the deal. He was the one that would get the buyers to sign all the paperwork and take the properties to the market to sell. Business was booming, and Gerard flourished with the added aid of his parents. Nigel and Elaine believed that their baby boy walked on water and would happily help him succeed, despite both being in their late 50s and approaching retirement age. Meanwhile, Alison fell pregnant with their second daughter, and while she was thrilled at the thought of having another baby, she was increasingly feeling overwhelmed and unable to cope. The anxiety attacks that had plagued her intermittently throughout her life were becoming more frequent, and in September 2003, when she was 6 months pregnant, she would finally go see her doctor in order to get help. She shared her feelings with the doctor, stating that she had experienced similar feelings during her first pregnancy. A miscarriage the previous year had also compounded things. Alison told the doctor that she felt reassured by Gerard's continued presence at home, and with his new career, his absences were leading her to feel alone and anxious. Gerard was actually with her during this appointment, and he held reservations about the doctor's prescription of Zoloft, which is also known as sertraline. It's a fairly common antidepressant, but Gerard didn't believe in depression and would later admit to thinking that Alison was making everything up in order to get attention. Within a month of taking Zoloft, Alison was feeling so much better. She had a name for what was going on, and by the time she gave birth to the couple's second daughter in December 2003, she was symptom-free. Fast forward to 2004, less than a year after starting the real estate game, the Baden Clays decided that it was time to branch out on their own. They secretly leased the office located next door to Rain & Horne and entered into a franchise agreement with rival company Century 21. Basically, what they were planning to do was take advantage of the foot traffic that had already been established by the Rain & Horne office and poach their clients. Things were going from strength to strength professionally for Gerard. He'd finally found something he loved and that he was good at. At home, however, things weren't so great. Alison wanted another baby. She felt as though she had got a handle on her mental health, and she'd always wanted a large family. Gerard, however, didn't want any more kids. Finances were pretty tight as they were now, and he already felt obligated to spend more time with his family than he was willing to give. He was bored with his marriage. He'd also been having an affair with a co-worker while at Rain & Horne, and it was an open secret within the office. While that affair was short-lived, the fact that Gerard was working all the time meant that Alison never suspected a thing. He eventually gave in, however, and Alison would go on to fall pregnant. Although she again felt the onset of anxiety during her pregnancy, she was able to recognise this and resume taking her prescribed medication. Soon enough, she was back feeling in control, and their third daughter was born in 2006. You may have noticed that I'm not including names of the daughters at all, and let me tell you why. In 2012, when Alison Baden Clay was murdered, her 3 young girls were aged 10, 8 and 5. With all the publicity that surrounded this case, her family went to great lengths to protect the girls and asked to have their names withheld from the media. Although the girls are now adults, and if you really want to, you can find out their names, I chose to respect the Dickies family wishes by not including the names here. In 2008, Gerard was again having an affair with a co-worker, a lady by the name of Toni McHugh. Toni described her attraction to her boss as, quote, "When I first started working for Gerard, there was chemistry for me. I admired him and I was attracted to him. I don't know how he felt," end quote. Toni was aware that Gerard was married with the family, as he had continued to play the role of the devoted family man, even confiding to her that his wife Alison had a rule that he'd be home by 5:30 p.m. in order to spend time with the kids. As a man well used to making decisions, it was 2 weeks after his 11th wedding anniversary in 2008 that Gerard made a choice that would alter his life. After working back late at the office one evening with McHugh, Gerard asked her to kiss him, and she did. It exploded into a passionate affair, with the couple meeting in secret and spending many more hours late in the office. 3 months later, Toni left her long-term partner and moved into a small apartment by herself, sharing custody of her 2 young children with her ex. Now, she and Gerard had somewhere they could meet without fear of being caught. They initially tried to keep their affair a secret. However, as time went on, more and more people started to notice. Eventually, Gerard just gave up trying to hide it from his colleagues.
It is fair to describe you as the mistress, isn't it?
That's how, yes, it is. But I believed that I wasn't that person for Gerard.
What did you believe you were?
I believed that I was in a loving, caring relationship that did have a future.
Even though he was a married man?
Yes, even though he was a married man.
How much did you love him, or how much do you love him?
I loved him very much.
Toni wasn't the only woman he was sleeping with either. He was cheating on his mistress with another agent while cheating on his wife at a conference. Alison knew that there was something wrong with her marriage, but she couldn't understand why Gerard was so distant toward her, because he was maintaining the family man image in public. He never gave her an actual reason for his sudden disinterest. He just simply withdrew from the marriage. Gerard and Alison would go to marriage counselling. However, Gerard only attended one session, citing work as the reason for not continuing. Even so, Alison told her therapist that she didn't want her marriage to end, that she wanted to fight to stay together and just to keep pushing through the rough patch. Fast forward to 2011, Century 21 Westside was facing problems. Gerard had largely ceased managing the business, and they were facing some real financial troubles. The business was in debt up to their eyeballs, and the staff were growing uneasy. What had started as a communal desire to grow the business and work as a team had now fractured into Gerard and Toni versus the other agents. They were sick of watching Toni get all the leads for new businesses handed to her personally by the boss. The dynamic in the office had changed and things were looking very dire. Gerard had worked really hard on his public image, eventually growing to become a valued part of almost every community association in the area. He counted local councilmen and politicians as friends and was well known and respected. He and Alison were now living in a rental property in Brookfield, which is an affluent suburb that boasts of a small village feel. Brookfield's the type of suburb where you have a millionaire's row, with multi-million-dollar properties located on acres of land. The Baden Clay's house, however, reflected the family's financial woes, paint peeling from the exterior, and the garden was overgrown and unkempt. In January 2011, Brisbane was hit by the worst flooding to hit the city in 40 years, forcing the evacuations of thousands of residents from the region. At least 90 towns and over 200,000 people were affected. Over 75% of the state declared disaster zones. The effects that this disaster had on Gerard's business were completely unforgiving. Finances, impending bankruptcy, and the end of his affair with Toni McHugh were taking their toll on Gerard Baden Clay. He was distant towards his family while struggling to maintain his carefully crafted image. Alison would finally find out that her husband had had an affair in 2011, in all places at her daughter's school trivia night. From being a well-kept secret for so long, it was now the hot topic of gossip and conversation. Alison confronted Gerard and he'd finally come clean, admitting that he'd been sleeping with Tony McHugh, although he wasn't in love with her. Alison gave him an ultimatum. He had to choose whether he wanted to continue the affair or stay in his marriage. Either way, Tony McHugh was no longer allowed to work with Gerard at Century 21 Westside. The business was collapsing around him, with associates and business partners leaving in droves, rats fleeing a sinking ship. The pressure was piling up, the floods had absolutely smashed his livelihood, and now his wife had found out about the affair. Not only that, he'd been forced to fire his lover, and the only person who was truly loyal to him at work. Gerard made the decision to stay with Alison, despite his earlier promises to McHugh that his intention had been to leave her in order to be with Tony. Keeping the marriage alive, however, allowed him to live permanently with his daughters and to prevent what was left of his business being carved in two in a divorce settlement. The trade-off was that he'd handed over control of the relationship to Alison, and he wasn't happy about it. The lovers would continue to meet, although Tony McHugh was growing more and more frustrated. In an email sent by McHugh in late February 2012, she states, "Well, you'll have to forgive me that I feel disappointed when this happens. I'm sick of hiding, I'm sick of being second best and having to take the back seat, also she doesn't find out. Why should I believe things are going to be any different than the past? I shouldn't. That's the reality. She gave you an ultimatum and you wanted it. If I were to do the same tomorrow, I doubt you'd be able to pay me the same respect. Why should I accept anything less than she would? All I'm doing at the moment is pacifying your fucked relationship. That's not fair, G." Gerard was torn. He wanted to be with Tony, but he also wanted to prevent Alison making his life hell. He would suggest to Tony that he didn't want to be intimate with her while he was married to Alison, and Tony would reluctantly agree. It never lasted long, however, and they always ended up back in each other's arms. In mid-March 2012, Gerard would visit Tony at her unit, and the couple would again agree not to be intimate until they could be together as a normal couple. Alison was furious at the state of her marriage. For years, he'd let her take all the blame for the distance between them, when in reality, it was the fact that he'd been having an affair. Even to call it an affair was ridiculous, as this had lasted longer than some marriages. When she finally found out 3 years after it began, Gerard had blamed Alison's depression. She was doing everything she could to keep their family together, for the sake of their daughters, and she was finally starting to recognise the gaslighting. On the Thursday, 19th of April, Alison had a hair appointment. She had a conference to attend the following day, and she wanted to look her best. Meanwhile, while Alison was at the hairdresser's, Gerard was on the phone to Tony McHugh. He was facing a bit of a problem. See, Tony would be attending the same conference as Alison. As Gerard explained this to her lover, Tony finally lost it. When the affair had first started, both were in relationships with children. Tony had left her partner for Gerard. In return, she felt he gave her excuses, promises, and illicit moments. She wanted to push him into honouring his promises, that they would be together properly one day. Gerard was always telling her that he couldn't afford to be leaving his wife, so why the hell was he paying for her to attend a real estate conference? The phone call ended with Tony insisting that Gerard tell Alison that she would also be at the conference. Meanwhile, Alison's at the hairdresser's, dreading the idea that tomorrow she'd be at a property conference, surrounded by her husband's colleagues. Some, if not all, would know about the affair. They would also know Tony, who was still working in real estate. Alison wanted to look her best and walk into that conference with her head held high. She went home and she wrote in her journal, "Had so many opportunities to tell me. Let me believe it was all my fault. I was at your mercy. Forced me to bow to you. Think that's where you wanted me." Later that night, about 11 p.m, residents of Brookfield would report hearing a woman scream. Just the one. On Friday morning, Gerard woke up at about 6 a.m, and seeing that his wife wasn't in bed with him, sent her a text message. Quote, "Good morning. Hope you slept well. Where are you? None of the girls are up yet. Love, G." He then walked through the quiet house before making himself a coffee, assuming that Alison was just out on her morning walk. He headed back to the master bedroom and to their ensuite, where he lathered in his face, ready to shave. One of his daughters must have woken up and called out for her mum, And Gerard heard and quickly rushed to her room with his face still covered in shaving cream, all foamy white. Gerard was a bit taken aback, but simply asked where Alison was. "She's gone for a walk," Gerard said, as he headed back to the bathroom. When his daughter next saw him, the foam was gone, revealing nasty-looking scratches down his right cheek. "Daddy cut himself shaving," Gerard told her, before asking him to help put some band-aids on. The girls got ready for school. Meanwhile, Gerard was starting to get a bit worried. Alison would need to hurry up if she wanted to be ready for the big conference in time. He tried to call Alison's phone, but it rang out. So he sent another text. "Al, getting concerned. I'm just making the lunches. Please text me back or call. Love, G." After receiving no reply, Gerard phoned his parents at 7:11 a.m. His sister, Olivia Walton, who was visiting her parents, answered the phone. Gerard explained that Alison wasn't home and asked if his family could come and help him search the local area. He also asked his sister if it was too early to call 000. After she reassured him it wasn't, he dialed 000 at 7:15 a.m.
960.
Thank you. Police emergency. What's your location?
Good morning, Brookfield.
Whereabouts in Brookfield, sir?
593 Brookfield Road, Brookfield.
And what's happening there?
I don't want to be alarmist. I tried the 131 number, but just went on forever.
Yep.
My wife isn't home. And I don't know where she is.
Okay. When did you last see her, sir?
Last night when we went to bed, when I went to bed, and I got up this morning and she wasn't there, and that's not unusual. She often goes for a walk in the morning.
Yep.
I've texted her and called her a number of times. I think she has her phone with her.
Yep.
And
what time does she normally get back when she goes for a walk?
This morning she was planning to. She has a seminar in the city, so she was planning to leave by around 7. And,
Okay.
She's not back home yet.
Okay. All right. And what's your wife?
I'm now driving the streets. My father's come over and to look after my children.
Yep. Okay. So what's your name first of all?
I'm sorry. Gerard, Gerard.
And your last name, Gerard?
Baden Clay, Baden
Yep.
-Clay.
And what's your wife's name?
Alison with 2 L's.
And same surname? Okay. And how old is Alison?
44.
Okay. So you didn't see her before she got up this morning, so...
No.
Okay. All right. And what's her mobile number?
0401.
Yep.
149.
Yep.
013.
013. Okay. All right. And how tall is your wife?
About 5'6", something like that, I think.
Okay. And what colour hair has she got?
She's just got it done last night. It's sort of a blondie, brownie, reddish sort of thing.
Yep. And how long is it?
Shoulder length.
Shoulder length. Okay. What I'll do, I'm going to put a broadcast on for the police to keep a lookout for your wife. Are you going to go back home? Because we'll get police to come and see you.
I need to go home and
Yeah.
get the kids ready for school.
Yep. All right, Gerard. I'll get police to come and see you, okay? What's the best contact number for you?
0400.
Yep.
456.
Yep.
100.
Okay. Just give us a call back if she hasn't returned before police get there, okay?
I will.
All right. Thanks, Gerard. Bye-bye.
Within minutes, Nigel and Olivia were on their way to help search for any sign of Alison. By 8 a.m, Constables Kieran Ash and Leah Hammond were responding to the Baden Clay household. Upon arrival at the home, they were surprised to see that there was a woman walking 3 young girls down the front steps of their house. Had Alison turned up after all? As the officers approached the house, Gerard appeared in the doorway and hurried to tell the officers that no, it wasn't Alison. Instead, the woman was his sister Olivia, who was taking the girls to school. An older man joined them and casually draped his arm around Gerard's shoulder. He was introduced to the police as Nigel, Gerard's father. The police asked to speak to Gerard privately, and he agreed, asking his father to wait outside while Olivia left with the girls. Alone with the officers, Gerard explained that the last time he had seen his wife was the previous night, when she'd stayed up to watch TV. Gerard had gone to bed about 10 p.m. and assumed that she had joined him sometime later. When he woke up to find her nowhere in the house, he assumed that she'd gone on a regular 2K walk. Gerard admitted that he couldn't be certain that Alison had joined him in bed, as she often would sleep in the couch or in another room. Now, the police noted that Gerard was smartly dressed for the office in long pants, shirt and a tie. What caught their attention, however, was the painful-looking scratches on his cheek. They trailed all the way down to a line. Constable Lash asked whether everything was alright between Gerard and his wife, to which Gerard quickly confessed that he'd been having an affair and that Alison had also found out. He didn't want his father or his sister to find out. When asked how he received the scratches, Gerard said that he'd cut himself shaving. He was distracted and he was in a rush to get the girls ready for school. So the police took his statement and asked to look through the house. As they entered the master bedroom, Constable Ash made note of the fact that there were no bloodied tissues or anything to show that Gerard had cleaned himself up after cutting himself shaving. Alarm bells were ringing and the police weren't sure whether to believe him. Ash and Hammond would report their concerns to the shift supervisor, Sergeant Andrew Jackson, as they both felt that something wasn't quite right. At approximately 8:30 a.m, Senior Sergeant Errol Curtis and Sergeant Jackson would arrive at the Brookfield residence, where Jackson activated his digital voice recorder. This would go on to capture Gerard explaining the injuries on his face before even saying hello. "Cut myself shaving," Gerard cheerfully volunteered as he opened the door to the new arrivals. First and foremost, police wanted to find out what Alison's state of mind was, to which Gerard responded, "Pretty good," before adding that Alison had a history of depression that had been managed by medication. When asked about the state of his marriage and whether there'd been any indications that this was actually a breakup, Gerard said he hoped this wasn't the case, as the couple were far from estranged. Again, he brought up the affair, however he told police that this had ended the previous year, and that Alison and he were attending counselling together in order to get through it. When asked to walk the officers through her wardrobe, Gerard was able to definitively say what Alison would be wearing on her walk, based on what was missing from her closed drawers. Police noted this as a little odd. Most husbands don't pay that close attention to their wife's wardrobe. Gerard continued talking with the detectives, answering all questions posed to him. After about an hour, Senior Sergeant Curtis went out on the front porch to call back to the station. She wanted to request that all available officers attend to form a search party for Alison. While she was on the phone, she noticed that Gerard's father, Nigel, was placing a vacuum cleaner in the boot of his car and sort of went, "Hey, no, you can't do that." By about 10 a.m, there was a crowd of police at the house. Less than 3 hours had passed since Gerard made his call to emergency. He'd invited the officers in and was now sitting at the dining room table. By now, it was obvious the police weren't just going to take a missing persons report and leave, and Gerard was really starting to show signs of struggling. While answering the questions from detectives, there was suddenly news that Alison's phone had been triangulated. It was showing it as being somewhere out the back of the house, and police were actively looking for the phone. Now, Gerard didn't react to this news as expected. He didn't appear to be either relieved that Alison could be walking in any second with a phone in her hand, or concerned that she could be hurt outside. He was again asked further questions regarding the cuts on his cheek. He agreed that the marks looked suspicious, and that, due to dire circumstances, he hadn't purchased new razor blades in 6 months. Ordinarily, in the morning, I take a long time to shave, be as carefully as I possibly can. This morning, I was rushing and you shave. I shave down, I shave back, I'd go sideways as well to make it as smooth as possible. I was rushing. Police needed to get a formal signed statement from Gerard about Alison's disappearance. They also wanted to photograph and document his injuries. Upon arriving at the station, Gerard allowed officers to take photos. However, after speaking to a lawyer, he would not provide a statement. His cooperation with the police was over, and later that day he made a comment to an officer that raised the red flag even higher. "If I'm going to be arrested, I'd like my sister Olivia to have custody of the children." No one was talking about an arrest. Police weren't even sure if a crime had been committed yet, but it was obviously on Gerard's mind. A major incident room was established at Indooroopilly Police Station, and on Saturday 21st of April was asked to provide the contact details of the woman who he'd been having an affair with. He was initially reluctant to provide this information, but eventually named McHugh and provided her phone number. He would then go on to ring Tony himself, warning her that the police would soon be speaking to her. Meanwhile, forensic investigators were processing the Brookfield house. One investigator arrived at 7 a.m. Saturday to start. However, he was told by officers who'd been placed on guard overnight that at 5 a.m. that same day, Nigel Baden Clay had come to pick up his Holden Statesman and the vacuum cleaner in the boot. He'd been turned away, however, as the officers were under orders to keep the area secure. The cars belonging to Alison and Gerard were towed to a facility off-site where they could be examined in the air conditioning. Meanwhile, Gerard was asked to come back to the station for further photographs. Police had the photos of the marks on his face, but hadn't used a ruler to show the scale, and they wanted to redo them. Gerard was again happy to come in for this, however, became nervous when asked to remove his shirt. On his chest, there was a mass of scratches or bruises. There were more scratches on the left side of his neck, which had previously been hidden by the collar of his shirt, and also near his right armpit. Gerard explained that these resulted from the previous day, when a caterpillar had bitten him while attending his children's school at cross country. Meanwhile, Alison's parents, Jeff and Priscilla, had arrived to help with the search. Jeff, however, was prepared for the worst, telling detectives that, quote, Alison would never, ever willingly leave her daughters, end quote. On Sunday, the forensic results came back from the cars belonging to Alison and Gerard. Alison's car had turned up nothing. Gerard's brand new Captiva, however, had been found to contain traces of blood. It wasn't the only thing that happened that day, however. Gerard Baden Clay had been driving to the police station when he mounted the footpath and drove straight into a concrete pylon that supported an overpass. The borrowed car's bonnet was instantly crumpled and Gerard badly shaken. While he was taken to the hospital for assessment, police were processing the crash site. They noted there were no other cars involved and no skid marks, suggesting that Gerard hadn't even braked. He was kept in hospital overnight and released early Monday morning.
Clay was behind the wheel of a friend's car when he lost control of it on Sunday, crashing into a pole outside the Indooroopilly shopping centre. The well-known real estate agent spent time in hospital.
On Monday the 23rd of April, Gerard was asked to do an appeal to the public. Gerard said that he'd think about it, but that he was worried about answering questions from journalists regarding scratches that were still visible on his face. Instead, Alison's parents, Jeff and Priscilla, would face the media. Now, I actually remember watching this live and thinking at the time how heartbreaking it was. And I'll be honest, it still gets me now. The raw emotion that you can see in the clip is absolutely agonising to watch. But it served the intended purpose.
Please help us, because there are 3 beautiful little girls of Alison's wanting to see their mother.
Our lives will never be the same. We must find her. She's so precious.
There were reports already that this was a crime investigation and that Gerard had been named as a person of interest. The absence of Alison's husband was raising eyebrows, although police declined to comment further. The thought of 3 young girls missing their mother mobilised the community into the largest search and rescue operation seen in Brisbane to this day. Volunteers joined emergency services workers to comb the surrounding forest, dams, and even abandoned mine shafts. As the hours turned into days, a wall of flowers and cards formed on the front fence of the Baden Clay home. Jeff and Priscilla Dickey were there every single day, maintaining a vigil for their daughter at the Brookfield showground. In contrast, Gerard was noticeably missing as the public face of the search. He should have been a husband, desperately searching for his wife and the mother of his 3 children. Instead, he dodged the media, staying with Nigel and Elaine at their nearby home.
Out of his parents' home, the pain and strain of the last 5 days was clear to see across Gerard Baden Clay's face.
I'm trying to look after my children at the moment. They've got 3 young girls, and we really trust that the police are doing everything they can to find my wife, and we just hope that she'll come home soon. I've spoken to the police about everything, and I've had no contact from her at all.
Was she upset before she went away?
No, and the police, I've tried to help the police as much as I can, and we all have, and everything we've got, so thank you, I'm sorry.
We just appeal to the public to please help us in any way that they can.
We've got such great family support, my sister and my family here, and they're looking after her.
We need to find her.
On Thursday the 26th of April, police conducted a search warrant on his parents' Kenmore property. When Gerard read through the warrant, he became visibly upset, although there were still no tears. The charge listed on the warrant was murder. Monday the 30th of April, a lone canoeist was paddling at Colo Creek, located at Anstead, about 13 kilometres from Brookfield. It was a place he often came, although since the floods in January 2011, a fallen tree had blocked the access to the little creek at low tide. Today, however, the tide was high enough that he could cross the tree and reach the creek mouth. He was paddling under the big water pipes that crossed the creek when he saw her.
We're aware this morning at about 11 a.m. we have had advice to the police in relation to a person canoeing along various parts of the Brisbane River and tributes, in particular near the Colo Creek area and Mount Crosby Road. A female person has been located deceased on the banks of the creek in that particular area. At this time, I can't confirm that that person is the missing person, Gerard Baden Clay. The person is subject to a recovery process and also to confirmation that it is our missing person that we've been extensively looking for over the past 11 days.
Following the discovery of her daughter's body, Priscilla Dickey just wanted to see her granddaughters. She wanted to hug them and to be there for them. So she rang Gerard to ask if she could see them. He replied that he hadn't told them yet and he wanted to avoid a media circus. He told Alison's mother that it wasn't appropriate and they would talk about it the following day. By now, Priscilla was in tears, begging to see Alison's girls, and Gerard Baden Clay would again refuse before hanging up on her. Alison had 3 separate life insurance and superannuation policies, and Gerard didn't miss a beat when trying to claim them. While insurance companies generally ask to be notified as soon as possible of a policyholder's death, Gerard took this to the extreme, advising of Alison's death the day that her body was discovered. The next day, while medical examiners were conducting the autopsy, Gerard further advised of his intent to claim on the policy. It hadn't even been confirmed that the body found under the bridge was indeed Gerard Baden Clay yet. That didn't stop Gerard from seeking an urgent death certificate and lodging claims on each of Alison's policies, asking that they be expedited. In total, the policies amounted to a $975,000 payout. As the sole beneficiary, Gerard stood to receive the payout as long as he was not found to be involved with her death. On June the 13th, 2012, Gerard Baden Clay was finally charged with the murder of his wife. Although the case was largely circumstantial, relying on the blood found in Gerard's car, witness testimony, and the search results from Gerard's history on the day of Alison's disappearance, police were confident that they had the right man. Gerard's overriding emotion was anger. He glared at the detectives, showing a sullen side of himself previously unseen. When interviewed following his arrest, Gerard again refused to answer any questions, instead constantly repeating, quote, "I want to speak to my lawyer." He appeared in a brief mention at Brisbane Magistrates Court the following day. Gerard refused to look at the gallery, leaving court artists no option but to sketch the back of his head. It wouldn't matter as he was in the dock for less than a minute. Magistrates don't have the power to grant bail on murder charges, meaning Gerard's legal team would have to make a separate application to the Supreme Court. Outside court, Baden Clay's lawyer would simply state, "Mr. Baden Clay maintains his innocence." Gerard Baden Clay was scheduled to appear at the Brisbane Supreme and District Courts to determine whether or not he would receive bail. His parents and his sister had managed to come with $500,000 for surety after mortgaging both their properties. Olivia had been working the phones, calling anyone who had any relationship at all with Gerard, including local members of Parliament, asking if they could donate $1 million to secure his freedom. Not surprisingly, she'd been unsuccessful. On the day he was scheduled to appear, however, a bomb threat was called into the Supreme Court minutes before his hearing. Chaos ensued, with lawyers and defendants being cleared, and court proceedings were cancelled, while police searched and secured the building. As a result, Baden Clay's hearing was adjourned until the following day. Gerard's bail was denied, as it was felt that he presented a high flight risk. Baden Clay was devastated at the denial of his bail application. He blamed his legal team and fired them immediately. Olivia Walton organised for Michael Boschner and Tim Meehan from Boschner Lawyers to drive out to Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre, where Baden Clay was being held on the 2nd of July 2012. The pair were currently representing an unwell-known criminal, Brett Peter Cowan, the man charged with kidnapping and murdering Daniel Morecambe. His legal team launched a second bail application, claiming there was a possibility that Alison had not been murdered after all, stating, quote, "An examination of the Crown brief showed that there is as good, if not better, case for the suicide of Ms. Baden Clay as there is for murder." End quote. The defence would go on to suggest that Alison had taken her own life following discovery of Gerard's affair. Thankfully, the presiding judge did not accept this theory, refusing to grant bail for Gerard, meaning he would stay in prison until trial. Now, I told you earlier that I had a personal connection to the case, and now's as good a time as any to explain how and why I became involved. In 2012, I was living in a suburb of Brisbane, very close to Brookfield. I was one of the hundreds of volunteers that helped search for Alison in the week following her disappearance, and I also attended court at Baden Clay's bail application and throughout the trial. During the first few days after her disappearance, I'd go to the Brookfield showground and wait to find out where I was needed. I remember going over to the elderly couple that was sitting on their folding chairs and offering my condolences. Priscilla and Jeff were there every day in that hot Queensland sun, and that really touched me. It was in stark contrast to the Baden Clays, who we never once saw involved in the search. I honestly had no doubt in my mind that Gerard Baden Clay was guilty from the day that Alison's body was found, and I, along with thousands of other supporters, wore yellow. I'm not sure when yellow became the colour associated with Alison, but I do know that it was her favourite colour, and it became the public way to show support for Alison and her family. Outside the court each day was just a sea of yellow as members of the public watched the trial from an overflow court. It actually became a running joke that each day of the trial, Elaine Baden Clay would show up dressed in purple, and gradually this was echoed by members of the Baden Clay camp. It became yellow versus purple, which, as any blonde knows, cancels each other out. Gerard Baden Clay's trial officially began on June the 10th, 2014. Gerard Baden Clay officially pleads not guilty in the Supreme Court to murdering his wife more than 2 years ago. It was just over a month of testimony and 4 days of jury deliberation before Gerard Baden Clay was found guilty of murdering his wife. As the verdict was read, all the people crammed into the court started cheering as we watched Gerard rocking backward and forth on the screen. We watched as Elaine Baden Clay suddenly stood and walked out of the courtroom. She didn't stay and listen to her daughter-in-law's family as they read their victim impact statements. She didn't even stay to hear her son's sentence. After presiding over the case objectively, Justice Byrne was scathing as he addressed Gerard. "Gerard Baden Clay, on the night of 19th April 2012, you murdered your wife Alison. The killing was not premeditated, but it was violent. That night you were under considerable stress. Your financial circumstances were, as you confessed to police, dire. Your domestic circumstances were no better. You had resumed your affair with Tony McHugh. You kept telling her that you loved her. You led her to understand that you intended to leave Alison and to be with her. That afternoon, you told Miss McHugh that Alison would be at the conference Miss McHugh was to attend in Brisbane the next day. Alison knew nothing about the resumption of the affair. You deceived her into believing that it had ended in September 2011. If the two women were to meet the next day, the consequences could have been dramatic, as you realised. Your unsuspecting wife was doing her best to maintain the marriage. The relationship counsellor had devised a plan. It allowed for Alison to express to you her feelings about the affair in the brief session every second day. You agreed, reluctantly, to that. The first session happened the night before Alison died. It had turned into an interrogation. Alison remained tormented by the affair. She pressed you for details. On the night she died, Alison again questioned you about the affair. The prosecution suggested that you smothered Alison. That looks likely, but whatever the mechanism, your violent attack caused her death. Her fingernails scratched your face, the act of a desperate woman struggling for life. Those marks are only consistent with your guilt. Your shameful conduct after murdering Alison bespeaks a profound absence of remorse. You took her body to Coalo Creek. There you disposed of her in an undignified way, dumping her over the ledge to leave her lying in mud, exposed to the elements, insects. Then you put in place, and persisted in, a deception. You used a razor to cut yourself near where she scratched you, trying to disguise the injury she had inflicted in defending itself. You drove around the streets of Brookfield pretending to look for her. You have insinuated her mental illness may have led to drug overdose or suicide, and besmirching Alison's memory in that way is thoroughly reprehensible. You have no criminal history, but you were definitely not of good character. You were given to lies and other deception, so much that whatever you may say on any application for parole 15 years or more hence will need to be assessed with considerable scepticism. The community, acting through the court, denounces your lethal violence. The impacts on Alison's family have been grave. Their impact statements poignantly express their pain. You took a devoted, loving mother from her 3 girls, blighting their lives. The law provides but one penalty for your willful crime. I impose it. You are sentenced to imprisonment for life. Now, I remember after the sentence was read, everyone left the courthouse and released yellow balloons into the sky. It was our way of celebrating the victory and of commemorating Alison's memory. Gerard's legal team quickly filed an appeal to reduce the murder conviction to manslaughter. In order to convict him of murder, the jury would have had to be satisfied that Gerard intended to kill or cause grievous bodily harm to Alison. The grounds of the appeal rested on the facts that the defence claimed that the presiding judge had not introduced the possibility of unintentional death when summing up the case to the jury. On Tuesday, the 8th of December 2015, the appeal was decided. Now, everyone was expecting this would be dismissed. However, Justice Fraser read the decision without delay. The appeal against conviction is allowed. The verdict of guilty of murder is set aside, and a verdict of manslaughter is substituted. The decision had been unanimous, with the 3 appellate court judges finding no fault in the judge's handling of the case, but they had found the jury couldn't be satisfied that Gerard intended to kill Alison. The decision to overturn Gerard's conviction, essentially downgrading it from murder to manslaughter, was an absolutely landmark decision. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about the law itself, but I'll try to explain why as best I can. The appellate court overturned Gerard Baden Clay's murder conviction and downgraded to manslaughter because, in their belief, the jury at his initial trial had not been instructed to consider the possibility of an accidental death. He could have pushed his wife, causing her to fall and hit her head, thereby causing her death. And, once he saw that his wife was dead, he panicked, and so he threw her body off the Collow Creek Bridge. The public was absolutely shocked and angered by this decision, as were many legal professionals. There was a feeling that the Court of Appeal had overreached in their decision to set aside the conviction. Alison's family was in complete shock. 3.5 years after their daughter's murder, Priscilla and Jeff Dickey were not about to let him get away with it. They again turned to the public and the media for support. There was a rally held in Brisbane, and thousands attended in order to protest the downgraded conviction. The feeling toward the Baden Clay family was acrimonious, to say the least. It had been proven in a court of law that Gerard killed his wife. He was in prison where he belonged, and that should have been the end of it. The High Court is Australia's highest level of court. They hear less than 5% of appeals put to them each year. They're the last line of defence, and a High Court decision will never be overturned. It was decided that the Crown, Queensland Police, the prosecution, would appeal the Court of Appeal's decision overturning the murder charge to manslaughter and have the matter heard in the High Court of Australia. The High Court agreed to hear the case, and the hearing would be held on the 26th of July 2016. 4 years after her death, the conviction of her husband would be decided upon by 5 judges, with the Crown case led by Walter Sofronoff and Danny Boyle. Sofronoff and Boyle expertly dismantled the Court of Appeal's 2015 decision, pointing out that during the 2014 trial, Gerard's defence had run a murder or nothing approach. At no time during the trial had the defence presented an accidental death argument, and furthermore, if Alison had in fact died of hitting her head, there would have been physical evidence to support this. And there wasn't. I think one of the High Court judges summed it up best. Justice Patrick Keane put it bluntly. He, meaning Gerard, has had the opportunity to give the evidence. He has given the evidence. It's inconsistent with any notion at all that there was an unintended killing by him. Justice Keane said what the public had been saying all along. High Court decisions can usually take 3 to 6 months to hand down. but it only took a month for the High Court to deliver this one. On the 31st of August 2016, exactly 4 years, 4 months and 11 days after Alison was reported missing, the High Court gave its unanimous ruling in the Queen v Baden Clay. The Crown's appeal was allowed and Gerard's murder conviction was restored. This time, it was really over. In a statement to the media, Alison's best friend Kerry Ann Walker said of the ruling, "Despite many Queenslanders being labelled as ignorant when they protested the downgrade to manslaughter, the common sense of the original jury has prevailed, and justice for Alison has finally been realised. The ignorance, it seems, lies elsewhere. The law has acknowledged what we, who were closest to her, knew from the very morning Alison went missing, that is, that she was murdered. Gerard Baden Clay murdered his amazing wife Alison. The evidence in the original trial displayed his intent as well as his character. Today's decision brings to an end Gerard's attempts to smear Alison's name. 4.5 years ago, 3 beautiful girls went to bed with a mother, and the next morning they woke without one. He let them and the whole community worry and anguish for days about what had happened. In a fair and open trial, a jury found that there was enough evidence to convict Gerard Baden Clay of murder. They felt that there was motive and certainly intent. Thankfully today, Australia's High Court judges agreed with this decision and have reinstated the conviction of murder. Gerard will serve out his time in Woolston Correctional Centre, where he is referred to only as prisoner E00477. He's housed in the secure area of the prison, but regularly petitions to be moved to the residential area, general population, in order to allow himself more space and freedom.
When Alison was murdered, domestic violence was not spoken about. It happened behind closed doors and it was a taboo subject.
Launched in her memory, the Alison Baden Clay Foundation has campaigned to raise awareness about domestic violence and the signs of coercive control.
We now can understand that Alison did experience coercive control. She was isolated, there was financial abuse, she was emotionally manipulated. Do everything we can to eliminate that violence.